His laughter still echoes in my head. "You're just a jealous underachiever," he laughed, leaning back in his ergonomic chair like a king on a throne. Outside, the rain hammered against the office windows like a ticking clock to something inevitable. Inside, my hands were cold. Not from fear, but from fury I refused to show. This wasn't just another bad day at Langley and Rowe. This was the day I, Dana Bell, discovered that the man in the corner office, Philip Stone, vice president of operations, had built his entire career on a lie. A stupid, reckless lie. And I had proof. But in that moment, he thought he had won. "Who's going to believe you over me?" he sneered, pointing that same finger he once used to congratulate me on record-breaking audit recoveries. I stared at the nail he used to tap his fake diploma with during every all-hands meeting. It suddenly looked smaller than I remembered. He didn't know what I'd already done. Or what was coming. He didn't know that I wasn't the version of Dana Bell who used to bite her tongue to keep the peace. He would. It all started 2 weeks earlier. I'd been working late. Again. My department was in the middle of reconciling a multi-million-dollar contract with a European partner, and something didn't add up. Access permissions on shared files were locked behind restricted credentials. When I requested admin access, IT flagged it for management approval. That's when the email came from Philip Stone, our golden boy VP of operations and the company's public face. He denied the request. No explanation. No questions. We'd worked together for 6 years. I knew every inch of his workflow, and he trusted me enough to hand off sensitive projects. But something had shifted. A week later, I was pulled into a surprise HR meeting. No warning, no cause, just a thin folder with vague accusations. Insubordination, breach of internal data access protocols, disruptive behavior. I wasn't even angry. I was stunned, betrayed. Effective immediately, the HR rep said. She wouldn't look me in the eye. Philip stood behind her, arms folded, smiling faintly. I stood. "You've made a mistake," I said quietly. His smile widened. "We'll let legal decide that." No one asked me to clean out my desk, but I understood the message. I gathered my belongings silently. I wasn't always in corporate finance. Before I joined Langley and Rowe, I spent 4 years consulting for academic institutions, verifying credentials, uncovering forged publications, and flagging faculty padding their resumes with phantom accolades. It was niche work. Quiet. Thorough. I liked that. Most people at the company assumed I landed here by chance, a capable number cruncher with a knack for compliance. But I'd seen fraud up close. I knew the signs. And the more I thought about the restricted access, the untraceable documents, the odd inconsistencies in Philip's public bio, the more it all clicked. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I did what I do best. I verified. First stop, the university he bragged about, Ivy Atlantic. The alumni directory didn't list a Philip Stone, not under business, economics, or any variation of his name. The degree hanging on his office wall? A replica print, available for $79 on a site that specialized in novelty diplomas. I stared at it for a long time. My next stop was the Professional Licensing Board. The finance certification he boasted about never issued. Not even a revoked license. It simply didn't exist. And his glowing resume on the company's leadership page? It had been uploaded 2 months before I joined, when the company went through a quiet rebranding and archived its old press kits. I downloaded everything: screenshots, PDFs, metadata, the whole digital trail. Then I remembered something even more interesting. A conversation we had over drinks 2 years ago at a company retreat. He was bragging, loud enough for the junior team to overhear, about how paper doesn't matter anymore if you can play the part. At the time, I brushed it off. Now it sounded like a confession. I cross-referenced his earliest employment records. Sure enough, the same non-existent degree showed up again, just with a different graduation date. He'd been editing his story for years, tweaking it depending on who was checking. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. But not for myself. For the company. For the interns who idolized him. For the real professionals whose careers were stunted while this fraud got promoted on empty words and fake prestige. I knew I couldn't walk into HR and expect them to believe me. Not yet. Philip had powerful friends. He played golf with the board chair. He sat in on investor calls. I needed more than proof. I needed strategy. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about Philip's ego or a padded resume. His fake credentials were baked into financial filings, investment decks, and regulatory compliance documents. His supposed qualifications were referenced in the company's quarterly statements, meaning any exposure wouldn't just damage his reputation. It could trigger an SEC investigation, investor lawsuits, stockholder revolt. Langley & Rowe wasn't a mom-and-pop outfit. It was a multinational with government contracts and high-profile clients. If a top executive turned out to be a fraud, it wouldn't stop at internal scandal. This was systemic risk. So I pivoted. Instead of confronting HR again, I used the one thing no one questioned: my resignation. On the surface, I was just another corporate casualty, packing up after a vague compliance violation. But beneath that, I started talking, quietly, to people who'd trusted me for years. People in legal, people in risk management, people who, like me, had long suspected something was off about Philip's meteoric rise, but never had enough to say it out loud. One of them, a former internal auditor who left the company 6 months earlier, said he blocked 3 separate report reviews. Told us they were being duplicated by a third-party firm, which didn't even exist. She sent me her draft notes. They lined up perfectly with the anomalies I'd found. Now I had a timeline, a pattern, a cover-up. But I still needed an opening. Something public, something that would make it impossible to sweep under the rug. If I sent this to HR or legal, it might disappear before it ever reached the board. But if I got it in the right hands, someone outside the internal hierarchy, it would trigger a mandatory investigation. And then it happened. A company-wide announcement hit the newswire. Langley & Rowe had been nominated for a federal advisory contract on digital infrastructure. A massive deal, worth 8 figures and years of high-visibility work. Philip was named as the executive liaison for vetting and documentation. His credentials were now part of a government file. I sat in my apartment and stared at the screen. That night, I sent one single email. No flair, no drama, just a subject line. Urgent compliance matter, executive misrepresentation in federal filing. And attached, every piece of documentation I had. Cross-referenced, time-stamped, sourced. It went to one person, the Office of the Inspector General. I didn't hear anything back for 4 days. Long enough to question whether I'd made a mistake. Long enough for the silence to feel like a second punishment. I'd risked my entire career to expose Philip, and the company moved on like nothing had happened. Until the 5th day, at exactly 10:42 a.m., I got a phone call from an unfamiliar number. A woman from the Office of the Inspector General introduced herself. Her voice was calm, measured. She asked only one question. "Is there anything you haven't told us yet?" That was it. By noon, I'd received a formal request to participate in an external investigation, discreetly for now. I was asked not to contact anyone at Langley & Rowe or make any public statements. I agreed without hesitation. Let Philip feel comfortable. Let him believe he'd buried me. Meanwhile, I watched. 2 weeks later, whispers started. The CFO, known for being immovably loyal to Philip, suddenly took an extended medical leave. The internal compliance officer who once refused to make eye contact with me was now coordinating late-night calls with outside counsel. The house of cards had begun to sway. Then the board scheduled an emergency executive session. No agenda, no context. Just a notice sent to senior staff with a non-negotiable attendance requirement. I wasn't supposed to know that, But corporate walls aren't as solid as people think when the quiet people start talking. A day before the meeting, a former analyst reached out to me on LinkedIn. "Hey, not sure if you're following what's going on, but you were right." Attached was a forwarded internal memo. It referenced serious concerns regarding credential discrepancies and professional misrepresentation at the executive level. No names. But we both knew who they were talking about. Philip didn't. He was still giving interviews, preparing for the federal contract pitch, and hosting executive breakfasts with department heads. He looked invincible. But I knew that look. That overconfidence. That mistake. He hadn't even changed the fake degree on his office wall. The final stroke came when I got an invitation from the board chair herself to attend a confidential meeting. She thanked me, said my cooperation had brought a serious matter to light. I asked, "Will Philip be there?" She paused. "Yes, and you should be too." The conference room was painfully bright. Long glass walls, a cold steel table, leather chairs spaced too far apart, the kind of place meant to intimidate. But I wasn't intimidated. I'd walked in prepared. I'd lived in the shadow of this building long enough. Today, I would let it see me clearly. Philip was already seated when I entered, smiling. Always smiling. That smug, dismissive grin that had once disarmed rooms and shut down dissent. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, "You're kidding. This little vendetta made it to the boardroom?" I didn't answer. The board chair called the meeting to order. "Mr. Stone," she began, "we've received inquiries from federal oversight authorities. You've been named in an ongoing investigation regarding credential fraud and material misrepresentation." The words dropped like ice cubes into the room. Quiet. Cold. Irrefutable. Philip blinked. "That's absurd," he scoffed. "Where is this even coming from?" Everyone turned to me. I calmly opened the folder in front of me, one page at a time. First, the screenshots. Then the cross-referenced alumni lists. Then the certification records. And finally, his own conflicting employment documents, each dated, sourced, and authenticated. The legal counsel present leaned forward. "Mr. Stone, can you confirm the accuracy of these documents?" He reached for the papers, brows furrowed. "This is a hit job," he said, trying to sound amused, but his voice was tightening. "It's her word against mine." He looked at me, and I saw it, the fear. Not because he thought I had bested him, but because, finally, he realized I had never needed to outwit him. I only needed to let the truth speak louder. Still, he pushed one last time. "Who's going to believe you over me?" He spat, raising his voice just enough to crack the professional calm in the room. The board chair leaned in. "Apparently, the U.S. government." Silence. Then she turned to security. "Please escort Mr. Stone from the building." Effective immediately, his employment with Langley and Rowe is terminated pending the results of the investigation. His access to all systems should be revoked within the hour. He froze in place. Eyes wide, lips parted, his usual smoothness cracked open for everyone to see. When he passed me on his way out, I didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. He already knew. 3 days after the confrontation, Langley and Rowe issued a press release announcing organizational changes and a renewed commitment to compliance and transparency. Philip Stone's name was never mentioned, but internally, everyone knew. The quiet was deafening. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic messages online or drop hints to ex-colleagues. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring something that had been quietly broken: trust. Still, I won't pretend there wasn't satisfaction when the board reached out again. This time with a formal offer. They wanted me back. Not just in a side role. They wanted me to lead a new division. Executive risk and credential integrity. With full autonomy, a clean slate, and direct board access. Essentially, the one job that would have prevented Philip from ever slipping through the cracks. I didn't answer immediately. I took a week. I visited my mother. I cooked real meals. I breathed. When I did reply, I said yes, on one condition: I wanted every senior role re-verified by a third party. No exceptions. No grandfathering in old titles or networks of favors. They agreed. The ripple effects were enormous. 2 other executives quietly resigned. 1 board member stepped down to pursue other opportunities. The culture shifted. Slowly, but unmistakably. And as for Philip, he disappeared from the industry. Word spread. Government contracts require scrutiny, and he'd built his career on falsified ground. Last I heard, he was consulting for a startup that didn't list its leadership team publicly. It fit him, in a way, always hiding behind something. Meanwhile, I built something better. A team that knew what diligence looked like, that understood the power of quiet competence, that didn't need spotlights or applause, just the clarity of truth. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm, how I kept my head when someone like that tried to ruin me. The truth is, I didn't feel calm, but I did feel certain. Because people like Philip underestimate patience. They underestimate quiet people. They think strategy is loud and visible, but sometimes it's a whisper behind a locked door. A document filed when no one's watching, a seed planted that blooms in silence. They forget truth doesn't rush, it waits, and when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It walks right in.